I want to recognize and thank long-serving Massachusetts State Senator and women's rights advocate, Senator Harriet Chandler, for introducing me to you, Senator Roush. After one phone call with me, Senator Roush, she understood the importance of this bill, and Senator Roush said yes. You see, for the families of victims of domestic violence, the answer we hear most often is no. My younger sister Stacy, who lived in Colorado, was 44 years old and healthy with 2 children under 10 when her husband of almost 10 years brutally murdered her. She was finally ready to leave him after several years of trying. If he couldn't have her, nobody would. He staged the scene to look like an accident. The police report would disclose that his behavior was very theatrical when he was in front of law enforcement, yet the scene was not investigated as a crime. Once a detective heard the narrative from her husband, he really wanted to believe the story, that my sister had a cardiac episode in the shower. She slipped, fell, and died. 6 weeks later, the autopsy would reveal that the cause and manner of death were undetermined. A few weeks after burying her, I went to the cemetery. It was a rectangular patch of dirt. I was sitting next to her and I had a chill come over me. Stacy told me something wasn't right and that I had to do something about it. I immediately got into the car and called the Denver Homicide Unit. The detective was kind and empathetic, and I know he wanted to believe me. That first phone call would eventually lead the detective to do everything he could to see that my sister had justice. However, it was 2 weeks after her death, and investigating the case would be nearly impossible. Thankfully, after 3 years, the city of Denver allowed an expert in domestic violence, specifically strangulation, from the Training Institute on Strangulation Prevention, to review the autopsy. Among other things, he concluded that the 80 abrasions and contusions all over her body, front and back, from head to toe, did not support the story of a slip and fall in the shower. Over 7 years after her murder, her husband was finally sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for the first-degree murder of our sister Stacy. And here's the kicker. We were the lucky ones. Yes, we were lucky because Stacy got justice and she can rest in peace. And we had to wait 7 years for that. I don't need to give you the statistics Senator Roush just did. Over 50% of female homicide victims are killed by their intimate partner. I lost 7 years of my life in pain and agony, having lost my sister to murder. I knew in my heart that her murderer was walking free, and I couldn't rest until he paid the price. Most families are not as lucky as we are. Since I began doing domestic violence advocacy work, I have met far too many families whose cases were not appropriately investigated and whose cases are now closed. On my way in this morning, one of my friends who was waiting to get her case reopened let me know that they weren't even considering talking to her again and the case is still closed. Families are climbing an uphill battle for justice. Though my sister's case was in Colorado, this happens in Massachusetts too, very often. It's devastating. It's heartbreaking. If there had been a law in place like the bill Senator Roush filed today, our family would not have gone through the years of anguish. I would not have had to have been an amateur detective. I would not have lost years of my life with my husband and my children when they were in their formative years. There would have been a full investigation from the start. Family members would have been interviewed and the history of domestic abuse would have been disclosed. Law enforcement would have been trained to recognize signs and warnings of domestic abuse. My sister and my family would have been treated with dignity and grace from the beginning. I would not have been put in a position of fighting for justice. Families like ours should be able to simply breathe and mourn. with the most profound gratitude. Thank you, Senator Roush, and your staff for filing this bill.